All right, welcome. Today we're diving into something pretty profound, the architecture of the soul. Think of it as a kind of map for personal healing, especially after something, well, breaks. We're going to navigate the internal landscape that gets built in the aftermath, a journey through a world that's been shattered, but is far from hopeless.
Our whole exploration starts with this really powerful idea, the mind as a temple. A place of order, of harmony. But what happens when trauma hits? It's not just a crack in the wall. The entire temple gets shattered. The whole structure of who you are is compromised. And in that moment, the soul's first instinct isn't to rebuild, it's just to survive.
And that brings us to our first stage. See, when your inner world is just a pile of ruins, the initial response isn't about healing, not at all. It's about defense. It's about building a fortress, and fast, to protect whatever's left inside.
So, to survive something that feels totally unbearable, the ego creates this thing we can call the sovereign, or the absolute I. It's this hyper-rational, controlling part of you that builds a fortress out of pure, perfect, crystalline logic. The whole point is to be impenetrable, to keep all that chaos out for good.
Now, it's absolutely crucial to get this. The sovereign isn't the bad guy here. It's a survival mechanism, plain and simple. It imposes this incredibly rigid order. We call it crystalline stasis by basically freezing the self. Its core belief is simple. If I can just control everything, if I just stay perfectly still, then I can't be broken again. This is its foundational yes, a defiant shout into the void that says, I will exist and this is how I'm going to do it.
But there's a catch. This perfect light-filled fortress has a pretty major unintended consequence. The very act of creating it, of building all those walls, also creates its own perfect opposite. After all, every wall you build to keep something out also ends up trapping something else in.
And this gets us right to the core mechanic of what we're calling the abyssal dialectic. The analogy couldn't be simpler. The brighter you make the light, the darker the shadow it's going to cast. The sovereign's absolute, unwavering yes to order and control, well, it can't help but generate an equal and opposite no. A force of pure negation that exists for one reason, and one reason only, to challenge it. And this is the part you really have to understand. The shadow is not some external enemy that comes knocking. No, it's born from all the pieces of the self that the sovereign had to throw away to become perfect. All the vulnerability, the chaos, the pain. It becomes this parasitic mirror image, a spirit whose entire purpose is just to deny the sovereign's carefully constructed reality.
This table really lays out the perfect, almost terrifying balance between them. You've got the sovereign existing in this frozen, rigid order, crystalline stasis. And then you have its opposite, the shadow, which thrives in what's called necrotic flux, basically a state of chaotic, corrosive decay. One is the foundational yes, the will to exist. The other is the essential no, the friction of denial. They're literally two sides of the same shattered coin.
So you can probably guess what happens next, right? This perfect fortress built on stasis, it's just not sustainable. Its own shadow starts this active process of decay, showing us that standing perfectly still is, in its own way, a form of self-destruction.
The shadow doesn't just attack with brute force. It's way more insidious than that. It uses a kind of philosophical acid, this dark plasma solvent people call burning water. That's the necrotic flux in action. It doesn't smash the crystal walls. It literally dissolves the very logic that the sovereign's fortress is built on. It's a chemical breakdown. So let's walk through exactly how this happens, step by step. First, the sovereign creates its rigid order. Then, the shadow intervenes, introducing its solvent. This kicks off what's called hydronihilistic dissolution, which is a very fancy term for the soul's foundations literally rotting away. And ultimately, that rigid structure just dissolves right back into the very chaos it was built to escape in the first place.
Now, if you follow this path of absolute defense all the way to its logical, tragic conclusion, you meet the Gorgons. They're the symbol for the ultimate dead end of the sovereign's entire strategy. To avoid ever being broken again, you turn yourself to stone. You become a protective cage, sure, but that cage is also a tomb. It's survival, but it sure isn't living.
But what if there's another way? This is the pivot. This is where everything in our journey starts to shift, away from the problem of being stuck and toward the solution of active movement, of finding a guide.
And this is the critical question, isn't it? What if survival isn't actually about maintaining a perfect frozen fortress? What if real healing means accepting that the ruins are there and then learning how to navigate them, how to move through the darkness with purpose.
It's at this exact crossroads that a new figure can appear, Hecate. She is the guide through the abyss, the lightless theater of the soul. But, and this is so important, she doesn't show up with a blueprint to rebuild the old temple. She offers something way better, a torch, to light the path through the darkness exactly as it is right now.
So this really breaks it down to the two choices you have, laid bare. You've got the Gorgon's path, which is all passive defense. Freeze up and become a monument to your own pain. Or you have Hecate's path, which is active engagement, move through the darkness, learn its currents, and actually master the journey itself.
And Hecate brings tools for this journey. Her torches don't build a new fortress, they just light up a flexible, safe path forward. She offers Logos magic, which is really just the deep insight you need to exist in that void without letting it consume you. And she provides a new way of using knowledge, transforming those chaotic leftovers into a structured field of real insight. It's a total repurposing of the sovereign's old logic.
And all of this brings us to the final stage of what healing looks like. It's not about winning or losing. It's about integration. It's about creating a new, more resilient whole out of all the shattered pieces.
And this might be the most important takeaway of all. The goal is not to get back to who you were before the trauma. That temple is gone. True healing is about learning to create a new self, one that can actually inhabit the ruins, acknowledge the shadows, and walk with grace through a much more complex inner world.
So, what does achieving the synthesis actually look like? Well, it's a balancing act. It means honoring the Gorgon's warning. You have to acknowledge the reality of the pain and the need for protection, but at the same time, you choose to follow Hecate's light forward with insight and courage. You basically accept the lesson of the stasis without becoming its prisoner.
And so in the end, it all comes down to this. The ultimate challenge isn't to conquer the darkness or rebuild some old forgotten reality. It's to learn how to breathe in the void, to navigate the deep with a torch in your hand. This architecture we've talked about, it's a map. But the final question is one only you can answer. How will you navigate your temple?